Good evening, visitors, and welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Gerard Pratt, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Commander Glyn Hunter. On this day, 106 years ago, the First World War came to an end. At 11 a.m, the guns on the Western Front ceased firing after 1,567 days of continuous warfare, bringing to an end the bloodiest conflict the world had known. An eerie silence descended along the 760-kilometre length of the Western Front, a silence that would be recalled at the 11th hour. Then in commemorative ceremonies held in many Allied nations on the 11th of November the following year and every year thereafter for more than a century. The Great War, as it became known, had involved the mobilisation of 70 million servicemen and servicewomen worldwide. Its indelible impact defined warfare in human memory long into the 20th century. The war also left a grim legacy. 13 million people died, 10 million of them combatants. Over 1/3 of those killed were declared missing, having no known grave. The Australian Corps of 5 divisions fought at the forefront of many of the battles in the advance to victory. The Australian formations were pretty well played out, observed official war correspondent Charles Bean. Not one of the Australian battalions, normally 1,000 strong, could muster more than a quarter of their full number, and many were down to less than 100 men. Soldiers who had been through 4 years of war were simply relieved to have survived and looked forward to returning home. In the words of one, it was over. That was enough. Some 330,000 Australians served overseas, and almost 2/3 of them became casualties. More than 60,000, or 1 man in 5 of those who served abroad, died on active service. More than half of the 270,000 soldiers who returned had suffered some sort of wound. War-damaged veterans would be a visible reminder of the war in Australian society throughout the interwar years. The war took a similar toll on Australian Army nurses. Almost 1/5 of them were declared medically unfit upon demobilisation, and many more contracted illnesses after discharge owing to the debilitating effects of their war service. Many of these women remained unsettled by their experiences and failed to find domestic security in the years following the war. Over half of them never married, and many were dependent upon war service pensions. The social effects of the war were profound and enduring in Australia. Together with the loss of those who died and the devastation to the living, the war left a legacy of sorrow. Thousands of families were left with only the memories of men who should have returned from the war as husbands, fathers, and sons. This evening, we pay our respects to the men and women commemorated here on the Roll of Honour and to the survivors who returned home. This day also marks the 31st anniversary of the internment of the unknown Australian soldier within the Memorial's Hall of Memory. Plans to honour an unknown Australian soldier were first put forward in the 1920s, but it was not until 1993 that he was at last brought home. To mark the 75th anniversary of the end of the First World War, the body of an unknown Australian soldier was recovered from Adelaide Cemetery near Villers-Bretonneux in France and transported to Australia. After lying in state in King's Hall in Old Parliament House, the unknown Australian soldier was interred within the Hall of Memory here at the Australian War Memorial on the 11th of November 1993. He was buried with a bayonet and a sprig of wattle in a Tasmanian blackwood coffin, and soil from the Pozières battlefield was scattered on his tomb. The unknown Australian soldier represents all the men and women whose names are listed here on the Roll of Honour. This evening, we're honoured to acknowledge Vice Admiral Aaron Beng, Chief of Defence Force, Singapore Armed Forces, accompanied by Admiral David Johnston, Chief of Defence Force, Senator the Honourable Linda Reynolds, Senator for Western Australia, accompanied by Dr Mark Esper, Brigadier Nigel Best, Defence Advisor, British High Commission, and members of the Scots Guards, Pipes and Drums. Mr Glenn Keys, members of the Council of the Australian War Memorial, representing the Chair and fellow members of the Council of the Australian War Memorial, and Mr Matt Anderson, Director of the Australian War Memorial. We also warmly welcome Group Captain Ernie Walsh, President of the ACT Division of the Air Force Association, representatives from the Defence Special Needs Support Group, and Lieutenant General John Fruin, retired, and the accompanying delegation. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catafalque party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free.
those who are able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through until the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. The Roll of Honour lists more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. Normally at this ceremony, we tell the story behind just one of those names. But each year, on Remembrance Day, we commemorate all service and sacrifice by reading the eulogy for the unknown Australian soldier. The eulogy was first delivered on this day in 1993 by then Prime Minister, the Honourable Paul Keating, on the occasion of the interment of the unknown Australian soldier within the Australian War Memorial's Hall of Memory. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection in the following order. Vice Admiral Aaron Bang, Chief of Defence Force, Singapore Armed Forces, and Admiral David Johnston, Chief of Defence Force. Senator the Honourable Linda Reynolds, Senator for Western Australia, and Dr Mark Esper. Brigadier Nigel Best, Defence Advisor, British High Commission. Mr Glenn Keys, representing the Chair and Council of the Australian War Memorial. The final wreaths this evening will now be laid by visitors to the memorial.
do not know this Australian's name, and we never will. We do not know his rank or his battalion. We do not know where he was born, nor precisely how and when he died. We do not know where in Australia he had made his home or when he left it for the battlefields of Europe. We do not know his age or his circumstance, whether he was from the city or the bush, what occupation he left to become a soldier, what religion, if he had a religion, if he was married or single. We do not know who loved him or whom he loved. If he had children, we do not know who they are. His family is lost to us as he was lost to them. We will never know who this Australian was. Yet he has always been among those whom we have honoured. We do know that he was one of the 45,000 Australians who died on the Western Front, one of the 416,000 Australians who volunteered for service in the First World War, one of the 324,000 Australians who served overseas in that war, and one of the 60,000 Australians who died on foreign soil. One of some 102,000 Australians who died in wars of the 20th century. He is all of them, and he is one of us. This Australia and the Australia he knew are like foreign countries. The tide of events since he died has been so dramatic, so vast and all-consuming. A world has been created beyond the reach of his imagination. He may have been one of those who believed the Great War would have been an adventure too grand to miss. He may have felt that he would never live down the shame of not going, but the chances are he went for no other reason than he believed it was the duty he owed his country and his king. Because the Great War was a mad, brutal, awful struggle, distinguished more often than not by military and political incompetence, because the waste of human life was so terrible that some said victory was scarcely discernible from defeat. And because the war, which was supposed to end all wars, in fact sowed the seeds of a second, even more terrible war, we might think that this unknown soldier died in vain. But in honouring our war dead, as we always have, we declare that this is not true. For out of the war came a lesson which transcended the horror and tragedy and the inexcusable folly. It was a lesson about ordinary people, and the lesson was that they are not ordinary. On all sides, they were the heroes of that war, not the generals and the politicians, but the soldiers and the sailors and the nurses, those who taught us to endure hardship, to show courage, to be bold as well as resilient, to believe in ourselves and to stick together. The unknown Australian soldier was one of those who by his deeds proved that real nobility and grandeur belongs not to empires and nations, but to the people on whom they, in the last resort, always depend. That is surely at the heart of the Anzac story, the Australian legend which emerged from the war. It is a legend not of sweeping military victories so much as triumphs against the odds, of courage and ingenuity in adversity. It is a legend of free and independent spirits whose discipline derived less from military formalities and customs than from the bonds of mateships and the demands of the necessity. It is a democratic tradition, the tradition in which Australians have gone to war ever since. This unknown Australian is not interred here to glorify war over peace, or to assert a soldier's character above a civilian's, or one race, or one nation, or one religion above another, or men above women, or the war in which he fought and died above any other war, or one generation above any that has been or will come later. The unknown soldier honours the memory of all those men and women who laid down their lives for Australia. His tomb is a reminder of what we have lost in war and what we have gained. We have lost more than 100,000 lives, and with them all their love of this country and all their hope and energy. We have gained a legend, a story of bravery and sacrifice, and with it a deeper faith in ourselves and our democracy and a deeper understanding of what it means to be Australian. It is not too much to hope, therefore, that this unknown Australian soldier might continue to serve his country. He might enshrine a nation's love of peace and remind us that in the sacrifice of the men and women whose names are recorded here, there is a faith enough for all of us.
If able, please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the growing down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières, or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Chair and Council of the Australian War Memorial, the Director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the memorial's development project. We wish you all a pleasant evening. Ladies and gentlemen, a special performance by the Scots Guards Pipes and Drums will commence shortly. I invite you to make your way through the commemorative entrance to the memorial's forecourt to view this evening's performance.